What if everything you thought you saw was carefully staged? What if that gold medal moment wasn't dominance, but distraction? The scoreboard said victory, the commentators sold glory, but beneath that polished surface was a game that didn't make sense unless you were willing to see it for what it really was: controlled chaos. This wasn't about veteran leadership rising to the occasion. This was about control, about narrative, about protecting a hierarchy that felt its grip slipping in real time. Because when the pressure hit its peak, when the moment demanded absolute clarity and ruthless efficiency, the system didn't lean into its most dangerous weapon, it buried it. The most electrifying offensive engine on the planet was not unleashed, she was contained. Not because she couldn't deliver, but because delivering too much would have shattered the illusion. You don't sideline generational brilliance in the biggest moment unless there's something bigger at stake than winning. You don't take the one player who bends defenses, who warps spacing, who dictates tempo like a grandmaster, and reduce her to a role that drains her impact, unless the goal isn't just basketball. That wasn't strategy. That was suppression dressed up as coaching. A deliberate slowing of the game, a forced inefficiency, a system choosing predictability over dominance. And the result? An offense that looked stuck, rigid, hesitant, because the one player capable of turning it into something unstoppable was deliberately disconnected from the engine. Possessions bled out, momentum stalled, and the rhythm that should have buried the opponent never fully arrived. This wasn't a team maximizing its talent, this was a system protecting its comfort zone, even if it meant flirting with disaster on the biggest stage possible. But here's where everything collapses under its own weight: the numbers don't lie, and they never will. Strip away the politics, ignore the narratives, silence the noise, and what remains is pure production. And that's where the truth becomes impossible to hide. Despite being limited, misused, and strategically sidelined, the same player they tried to contain still rose above everything. Leading in scoring. Leading in playmaking. Dominating efficiency metrics that veterans built their reputations on. That's not just performance, that's exposure. That's the system being forced to reveal what it tried so hard to conceal. Because you can manipulate minutes, you can alter roles, you can shift responsibilities, but you cannot erase impact when it's that overwhelming. And while that truth exploded on the court, something even bigger was happening behind closed doors. Boardrooms moved. Deals accelerated. Negotiations that had stalled suddenly found urgency. Because the people controlling the business side saw what the world saw, they saw where the real power was shifting. Not in legacy status, not in past achievements, but in present influence. The gravity had changed, and everyone felt it. That's why timelines tightened, why agreements materialized, why decisions that dragged for months suddenly got resolved. Because when one player starts moving the entire ecosystem, ratings, revenue, attention, global reach, you don't just acknowledge it, you react to it. And that's the part no one wants to say out loud. The same presence that was minimized on the court became the driving force off it. The same impact that was strategically muted during the game became impossible to ignore in the business of the sport. That's not coincidence, that's reality breaking through control. And now, heading into what comes next, the pressure isn't just about performance anymore. It's about whether the system adapts, or gets exposed even further. And now comes the part they can't control anymore, the aftermath. Because once the illusion cracks, it doesn't quietly fade away, it spreads. Every possession gets rewatched, every decision gets questioned, every rotation starts to look less like strategy and more like intention. Fans who were once passive start connecting dots, analysts begin asking the questions they avoided, and suddenly that comfortable narrative feels fragile. Because the truth is simple and brutal: when you intentionally limit your most efficient weapon and still win, you don't prove depth, you expose fear. Fear of disruption. Fear of losing control. Fear of a new hierarchy forming right in front of everyone's eyes. And that fear leaked all over that game. You could see it in the hesitation, in the forced possessions, in the unnatural flow of an offense that should have been devastating but instead looked restricted, like it was operating with invisible handcuffs. That's not what dominance looks like. That's what containment looks like. And the scariest part for the establishment? Even with all those constraints, the impact still broke through. The gravity was still there. The efficiency still surfaced. The numbers still told the story they were trying to bury. That's when it stops being a debate and starts becoming a shift. Because once the audience sees it, really sees it, you can't rewind that awareness. You can't package it differently next time. You can't sell the same story again without resistance. The game didn't just end with a medal, it ended with questions that won't go away. And that's exactly why what happens next is going to be even more explosive. Because now it's not just about one game, it's about an entire system being forced to evolve under pressure it can no longer ignore. Front offices, coaches, executives, they're all watching the same thing unfold, and they all understand the same reality: you either build around undeniable impact, or you get left behind by it. There is no middle ground anymore. The era of balancing egos over efficiency is collapsing, and the margin for mistakes is shrinking fast. Every roster decision, every signing, every minute allocation is going to be scrutinized through one lens: does it maximize the engine, or does it restrict it? Because if you get that answer wrong, the consequences won't just show up in losses, they'll show up in relevance, in viewership, in the business side that fuels everything behind the scenes. The stakes have never been higher, and the margin for denial has never been smaller. This is where dynasties are either built with ruthless clarity, or destroyed by hesitation. And the warning signs are already there. The blueprint is obvious, the evidence is overwhelming, and the pressure is suffocating. The only question left is who's willing to accept the reality, and who's going to keep pretending until it's too late. And here's where the situation turns from uncomfortable to completely unavoidable. Because once a pattern is exposed, it doesn't just disappear, it intensifies. Every future game, every substitution, every late-game decision will now be viewed through a completely different lens. The benefit of the doubt? Gone. The blind trust? Finished. Now it's all about accountability. Because when the world has already seen what happens when the most dangerous offensive force is fully unleashed, even in small flashes, you can't keep selling limitations as strategy. People start asking the real questions: why slow the tempo when speed is your greatest weapon? Why prioritize isolation when ball movement creates chaos? Why force structure when unpredictability is what breaks defenses? These aren't emotional reactions anymore, these are logical breakdowns. And logic is the one thing narratives can't overpower for long. The more this continues, the more obvious it becomes that the issue isn't capability, it's control. Control over who leads, who shines, who gets the credit, and who reshapes the entire ecosystem. Because make no mistake, when a player starts influencing not just games but the entire direction of a league, that's when resistance peaks. Not because it's wrong, but because it's unstoppable. And systems don't fear failure, they fear transformation. They fear the moment when everything they've built has to be recalibrated around something new, something faster, something more efficient, something they didn't design. That's the tension you're watching unfold. Not just on the court, but behind it, above it, and around it. And now we've reached the tipping point, the moment where denial becomes more dangerous than adaptation. Because the next phase isn't about subtle adjustments anymore, it's about full-scale alignment or complete collapse. Teams that understand what's happening will move aggressively, they'll build smarter, faster, more precise systems designed to amplify, not restrict. They'll prioritize spacing, speed, decision-making, and efficiency over reputation and legacy. They'll surround greatness with pieces that fit, not names that sell headlines. And when that happens, the gap won't just widen, it will explode. Because when an already dominant force is finally given full operational freedom, the results aren't incremental, they're overwhelming. We're talking about an entirely different level of offensive pressure, a completely different pace of play,